Good morning and welcome to For Your Glory. I'm Hadassah. Welcome or welcome back. Thank you so much for joining this edition of For Your Glory. This whole channel is for the honor and glory of the Most High God. So we are on the second portion of studying the book of Esther, where I am specifically looking at three key women in the book of Esther. And the first woman that I looked at was Vashti. And now I am looking at Esther, the book. She has a whole book that is named in her honor. What I'd like to first mention is the fact that the name Esther means star. Esther is Persian. And Esther really was Hadassah. And Hadassah is associated with a myrtle tree. And a myrtle tree does not give off its fragrance. It does not, the fragrance does not emanate from it. The fragrance is not released from a myrtle tree until the leaves are crushed. And when we look at this story, it is quite clear that Esther's fragrance, her true character emanated from her when her back was to the wall and her people were about to be crushed. And so she truly lived out her name, right? Of course, when people ask me, my name is Hadassah, when people ask me the meaning of my name, I usually say star, because Esther is really the Persian version of Hadassah, and Esther means star. So Esther is very special to me. It is, a whole book was written about her, and she really was Hadassah. And as I would have mentioned before, my mom's best friend at the time gave me the name Hadassah because my mom wanted a name which began with H. My mom's name begins with H, and my father's name began with H. My father has passed away. And so Hadassah is my name. I love my name. I wouldn't trade my name for anything in the world. So Esther is found in the Old Testament just before the book of Job. So it's Job, and then it's Psalms, then it's Proverbs. Wait, hold on. Esther, then Job, then Psalms, then Proverbs, then Ecclesiastes. Esther was a Jew, and her parents had died. And she was essentially an orphan who was taken care of by her cousin. People tend to say her uncle Mordecai, but she was Mordecai's uncle's daughter, which means that Mordecai and Esther were first cousins, right? So let's look at Esther chapter 2 verse 7, which essentially gives a background about her. It says, and he brought up Hadassah, this is Mordecai, he brought up Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, so Hadassah and Esther, one and the same, for she had neither father nor mother, and the maid was fair and beautiful, whom Mordecai, when her father and mother were dead, took for his own daughter. So what a wonderful uncle. His cousin's parents had died, and he took her for his own daughter. And so we see also that Vashti and Esther had something in common. They both were fair and beautiful outwardly, for sure, right? So remember in the previous video, we discussed the dethroning of Vashti, and it was recommended by 7 princes that the king seek out fair virgins, right? After beautiful and virgins, after Vashti defied her husband, the king, Ahasuerus, right? So when we look at verse 3, I think we need to go to, chapter 3, Esther chapter 3. No. So we're still in Esther chapter 2. And it says, verse 3, and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom, that they may gather together all the fair young virgins unto Shushan the palace, to the house of the women, unto the custody of Hag, the king's chamberlain, keeper of the women, and let their things for purification be given them. So these young virgins, these beautiful young virgins, were actually in custody. And I don't think anybody really talks about that, or rarely talks about that. And I truly believe that many of these virgins, many of these young women, were dragged there. I mean, come on. They're young, they're impressionable, they haven't experienced life, many of them, and they were just taken into custody from their parents. So I believe that many of them went kicking and screaming, honestly. All right, it talks about being in the custody, the keeper of the women, in the custody of Hag, or Hagi, the king's chamberlain, keeper of the women. Now, I believe that there were some of them who would have probably not had a problem with going to the harem, which is where the king would have kept his concubines, etc., because life would have been better for them. I'm sure that there you had to have been fed properly, clothed properly. In fact, there was like months and months of them actually preparing before they could go before the king. You know, they had to be purified. You know, they were given their things of purification. For example, verse 12 talks about, now when every maid's turn was come to go into King Ahasuerus, after that she had been 12 months, according to the manner of the women. For so were the days of their purifications accomplished, to wit, 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with sweet odors, and with other things for the purifying of the women. So before you could even go to the king, once he called for you, you had to be soaked and purified, and I mean, with oil and sweet odors, etc. All right? So this thing was deep and whole. 12 months, 1 year, before you could even come before the king. All right, there was a level of purification, and essentially you were the king's property. You became the king's property. All right, but some of them may have been pleased to go there for sure food, for sure clothing, for sure shelter. Just a thought. That's just my thought. And then there were others who went against their will, really went against their will. That must have been a really sad time for some of these young women. Anyway, Esther was among those women, right? So she was an orphan. She was taken into custody. When we look at verse 10, it says, Esther had not showed her people nor her kindred, for Mordecai had charged her that she should not show it. So we know that Esther was obedient to her cousin Mordecai, who would have instructed her not to reveal that she was a Jew. So instead, she was told to use the Jewish name, not to use the Jewish name Hadassah, use the Persian name Esther, right? So as to ensure that it was not obvious that she was a Jew, right? So we see that Esther had true beauty and strength. We will see that she has had not only that physical beauty, but that inner strength, right? As we look into the story. So we realize that Mordecai, of course, was a Jew, was her cousin, and there was just some issues going on in the kingdom at the time, and we will look at those issues, right? Well, one of the things in terms of looking at her character, we know that she was obedient. She obeyed her cousin Mordecai, but we also realize that Esther was simple. So when we look at Esther chapter 2 verses 15 through 17, it says, now when the turn of Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her for his daughter, was come to go in unto the king, she required nothing but what Haggai, the king's chamberlain, the keeper of the women, appointed, and Esther obtained favor in the sight of them that looked upon her. So Esther was taken unto King Ahasuerus into his house royal into his house royal in the 10th month, which is the month Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. And the king, and that's very interesting, because remember, Vashti was dethroned in the 3rd year. It was in the 3rd year that the king had this celebration of his ascension to the throne. And so this is now the 7th year. So this is 4 years later, and there still isn't a queen, right? And the king loved Esther, because it says in the 7th year of his reign, right? She was taken unto the king. And the king loved Esther above all the women. And she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. So one of the reasons she obtained favor, I believe, was because of her simplicity. So I think that for many of the other women, whatever the chamberlain would have given them to wear, some of them were like, I for that, give me something with more sparkle. Okay, give me something with more jewels. I need some more gold, some more silver, some more rhinestones. Give me some rubies. Yeah. But Esther was very simple, and she asked for nothing but what she required, nothing more than what was given to her. And she obtained favor. That right there showed that she was different. All right. So then when we look at, so we also know that so she was obedient. We know that she was simple, but we also learned that she was courageous. So there was Haman, who was one of the king's men, who had been promoted, and everyone had to bow to him. But Mordecai refused to bow to him. Mordecai knew who he was. He really was evil. He was wicked, right? And so he was upset with that. And what he did was he concocted a plan. He went to the king and he said, you know what? There is a group of people who do not obey your laws. We need to get rid of them. And the king, he agreed. Yeah, let's destroy them. They don't obey my rules. And it caused great trepidation amongst the Jewish people. Mordecai decided to go down in sackcloth and ashes, and he enlisted the help of Esther, right? And Esther was initially timid to go before the king and say, she was like, you know what, I haven't been called by the king for 30 days. So that's another thing. That is a whole next piece of the story. She's the queen now, and her husband, the king, hasn't called for her in 30 days. All right, so who else is he calling for? Oh, that's a whole next story. He had many concubines, etc., right? But the point is, he didn't call for her in 30 days. And if the king does not call for you when you go before the king, you could be beheaded, right? Mordecai said, well, look here. If deliverance doesn't come via your route, come to the Jews through you, look here, it will come another way, okay? But we will be delivered. But who knows? Perhaps you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this. And that truly was Esther's assignment. So Esther took courage, and she called for a 3-day fast. No water, no food. This was a dry fast. 3 days. She said, I and my maidens, we will go on a fast, and I will go before the king for my people. And if I perish, I perish. Look here, she was willing to die for her people. And so eventually she did approach the king. And what's so beautiful is the king held out his scepter when he saw her. And she was able, and she survived, right? And he gave her grace when he held out that scepter. And one of the things that came to me in recent, like probably a year or two ago, I realized that when the king held out that scepter to Esther, that is like when God holds out the scepter to us. When we come to him as we are, and through the blood of Jesus Christ, he grants us grace. I equate that to when that scepter was held out to her and she received grace. That's how it is when we come to the Lord and we receive grace. Grace, God's grace. grace that is greater than all our sins, right? But it also shows if God be for you, who could be against you, okay? And the thing about it is, what's so interesting about the book of Esther is that God is never mentioned in this book, not even once. Go through it for yourself. The name God is never mentioned. But it is clear that God's providence is in this entire situation. So in a nutshell, Esther requested of the king that he and Haman, the wicked Haman, be called to a banquet. And the thing about it is, it was then that she revealed his scheme. She revealed his scheme against his people. And as I would have said before, we recognize that he just had a problem with the Jews and he wanted to annihilate them. Of course, I'm not telling you every part of this story. You actually have to go and read this book yourself, which is only a few chapters, right? But one of the things he did was he actually built a gallows. He built gallows so that Mordecai could be hanged on those gallows. However, once Esther would have revealed to the king that Mordecai was behind, when she revealed that she was a Jew and that Mordecai was trying to actually get rid of the people. The king knew what Mordecai was doing. He wanted to annihilate the people, but he didn't know the underlying reason, right? And just to know that this is my wife, this is the queen, and this is her people, and you're trying to annihilate them? No, it's not going to happen. And the thing about it, the laws of the Medes and the Persians cannot be altered. And so what he had sent out and what he had signed, what he had stamped, what he had decreed, that was it. So, but what he did instead was he decided, you know what, guess what? I'm going to send something else out, and the Jews have all right. They have all right to defend themselves. And so they were able to fight for their lives. And in the end, the Jews had power over their enemies and they defeated their enemies, okay? It's just a beautiful, beautiful story. And the thing about it is the same gallows that Haman had built for Mordecai to be hanged on, the king had him hanged on the same gallows, okay? And so there's a text in Proverbs, and I don't think I would have written it down. I'm not sure. I believe I may have written it down somewhere. I'm not sure where it is, but essentially the text tells us that when you dig a hole for someone, you must dig a hole for yourself also. So I want people to know, you know what, when you don't do wickedness, because it will come back to you. That's sowing and reaping. People think about sowing and reaping a lot when it comes to money and all of that kind of thing. That may be real. And we should never sow to reap. We should do things to the honor and glory of God and sincerely. But even negatively, what we sow, we shall reap. And so guess what? Mordecai, he reaped just what he sowed. And the thing about it is, even his sons, and we will learn more about his sons, not much is said about them, but when I speak about the next individual, who is actually his wife, the third individual I'm going to speak about in terms of the three women in Esther would be his wife, okay? But we learned that Esther was obedient. We learned that she was simple. We learned that she was courageous. And you know what? She had to replace Vashti. She had to replace Vashti. That was her assignment. She had an assignment. She had a role to play in the saving of her people. All right. And so we give God praise and thanks. I thank God for Esther, Hadassah. I thank God for this story. I thank God that He is the God who saves. I thank God that He hears and answers prayers. They went before Him. They fasted. They sometimes you got to turn down your plate for certain situations. Food could go on the side, but you need to go before God about some situations, and she did. And God delivered in a mighty way for the Jewish people. And so I just wanted to share that with you. That's the second woman in the book of Esther, Esther herself, that we're discussing. And I hope that you will join us again for the third edition of this series on the women of Esther. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for joining me. Once again, I'm Hadassah. Like, subscribe, and share. Take care, and God bless you.